time for another round of Brandy. Candid conversations over cocktails about all things brand with your hosts, Reilly Newman and Scott Saunders, the brand developers behind Motif Brands.
And welcome back to another round of Brandy. Scott and I here today talking about a question that we get asked a lot.
We get asked all the time, what's the secret recipe, right? What's the process by which you can have a successful brand? And there's no secret recipe. There's no step-by-step things because every brand's unique and different.
But we do have three cornerstones for a successful brand that we'd like to highlight.
I like to call them the 3 C's of success, even though success only has 2 C's, but it works out better when you have 3. Anyway, so it's basically what boils down to is clarity, consistency, and creativity. And we're gonna touch on all 3 of those C's, which to me that's where the rubber hits the road when you are trying to have your brand become a very go from a good brand to a great brand or a successful brand. It's right. Those 3 approaches. So starting us off with clarity, it's a topic we've talked about before, right, Reilly? I think back in episode 1, we kicked off our first podcast on a whole podcast on this topic. But it's one to always swing back around too, right?
Oh, yeah. And it's definitely, it's the core of a lot of the conversations we have with clients, because that brand clarity, like we talked about in episode 1, is that whenever a client hears that term, or even just someone that we're talking to who has a business, they do kind of, self-check and go, maybe I don't have clarity about my brand. I might have clarity about my business and how I make money or what I have to sell or any of those things, but they lose the clarity when it comes to the brand side of it. They don't quite know who they are. They don't know how they stand out. They might not even know who they're for exactly. Right. So when we do bring up that term, typically I'll get the response of it starts to click because I don't know if they haven't framed brand in that lens of having clarity as much as you can have clarity with a business. And again, brand does step into this gray area. So when you do talk about clarity, it is an aspirational kind of motion where you're trying to go after this. Hey, I want to be this. This is who I am. This is who I want to be perceived as. And this is who I'm trying to target. And it really does come down to the core of it, because this kind of sets up your business so you can be consistent in something, so you can be creative in something. Having that clarity really starts laying down that foundation.
And I think a lot of that, you said that it's not so much the business component of it, but I think some of the clarity for your brand is comprised of that, because the key thing for as I see brand clarity is really, and I always see when businesses don't have clarity is because their approach is they're trying to sell. If you were to say, who are you selling to? Who's your audience? And if they respond everyone, then they lack clarity, because a brand as a person can't relate to all people at all situations. There's you can't speak to everyone in the room. There's different mentalities, there's different perspectives, there's different demographics, there's different likes and dislikes. And for a brand to feel like it can appeal to everyone, there's the red flag for me that their brand really lacks clarity. And so knowing specifically more, and so when we talk about clarity, it's also more refined focus. When I think of like laser clarity, right? There's clarity of a picture. It's not blurry. It's crystal clear. But I also think of clarity being more refined focus. Yeah. In other words, you're zeroing in on more specifically who is your ultimate customer. Yeah,
and it reminds me of almost like a flashlight. Is that you can adjust a flashlight so it's this broad beam of light that's very. It's very fuzzy though. You have it's dispersed across a wider area, versus when you can tighten that focus on the flashlight, it becomes a much stronger beam and a much stronger light, and that saturation of light in that spot is much stronger. And it's like when you think of business, the game's never been about selling to everyone, unless you're playing the Amazon game where you're dropping prices close to zero and everyone will buy it without thinking. But we even see this in politics, where you do get people who are running campaigns and they're trying to appease everyone, and they get themselves into hot water where they're swapping policies or they're lukewarm on things, and they can't please everyone. That's just not that's not possible. And same thing goes with business. Like Scott was saying, is when you know not only who you're talking to and who you're advocating for, but also who you aren't for. It's just as much of knowing who you are, it's just as important to know what you're not. Because that's going to give you clarity of where to put that effort, where to put that beam of light and really shine brightly in those areas that matter and don't care about those other areas. And that does take, it takes confidence. It takes courage to really go, okay, I'm making a decision here. I'm not spending effort, resources, or time in these certain areas because really it's like these people care about my product and care about my business and I can help them the most.
Yeah. And that clarity can also come to in the form of where you're headed as a business, because obviously as a business, you want to be moving forward. You want to be, and as a brand and business, you want to be moving forward. You want to have progression. You want to grow. You want to grow the brand. You ultimately love to have the profits grow, right? And the business grow. So that's why you're doing business to begin with. So when you think about that, then again, clarity is also that northern star. It's that point on the horizon that you're pointing your ship, that you're moving forward to. It's a course. And so if you just feel like, oh, I'm just kind of meandering about as a business, well, okay, maybe you're getting by. And again, but if you really wanted to move forward and grow and have a great brand, you've got to have the clarity that is also the point. It's that razor point, but it's also where you want to go as a business, which may be a different audience than you currently have. And again, that's where brand clarity is going to help get you there when you have that clarity of vision, either the here and now who you're speaking to or who you want to be speaking to tomorrow, hypothetically.
Yeah. So if you want to gain more clarity with your brand, check out episode 1 of our podcast. We talk about, brand clarity and what it means for your business and kind of what all that entails. A nice little deep dive. But on to the next C, right, Scott?
The next C is consistency. And the brands that try and make efforts, and some of them efforts are successful, and of them aren't, when they're giving mixed messaging. In other words, when your brand and your messaging are saying one thing, but then it's not saying that in other areas. That creates problems for your brand and really prevents you from being successful.
Yeah. And when you think about consistency, it kind of goes back to like that brand experience of all these little touch points and where your customer's engaging with you, where they're interacting with you. And, maybe it's reading a newsletter or seeing your social post or getting your product in the mail. They're interacting with you on all these different levels. And there has to be consistency going through that, or it's going to be the brand dropping the ball and there's a kind of gap in it. And for humans, like we've talked about before, is like that's like a red flag where if they go, okay, the website looked very legitimate, but then when I got the product, it was in this weird box and it looked almost fishy, and it kind of starts degrading the perception. And I think when you look at the clarity aspect of what, okay, I'm connecting with these people, what is that clarity that now I'm bringing over to be consistent with? And then how in these areas can I be consistent? And you kind of start taking apart the customer journey and go, okay, I want this overall experience to really have that carry through, and how you can keep building value into that.
Yeah, and particularly in my specialty of the visual brand components and touch points, that's where I see so many times where small businesses will pay and invest to have a great logo developed for them. But then that great logo then is being put on, in visually congested ways, inconsistent ways, different things are being added to it because basically they've been given a very powerful tool, and in the novice hands of most business owners, because their primary wheelhouse is not design. It's in other things, which why they're doing, business and other things, but it's not their strength. It's very inconsistent. You get this beautiful logo, but then you get this business card where everything is crowded. It doesn't breathe. It's a weird font to go with the logo, and everything's all it's just, there's no design aesthetic to that or other components. You could even have great other assets, but then if your employees are just typing out temporary signage all over the place and sticking up with tape and on fluorescent colored papers and stuff, and in and around the rest of your signage and interior design, there's inconsistency in that.
Right. And it's kind of like how Walt Disney used to say how everything speaks. And like that episode we did just about that, where it's like everything you do, like it really does say something about your brand and your business.
And you look at other, like a company like Starbucks, everything down to the name placard they have for their desserts in the case counter is uniform. It's consistent. It is there's a design aesthetic throughout all the touch points, right? And you see that, and say our Disneyland, any of those places we talk about are great brands that we love. Everything down to the detail, is consistent.
Beyond the visual, it's like when your customer is interacting with you, there's that internal narrative where they go, okay, I've bought into this brand, whether that is Starbucks or you purchase something off, a website. You've committed to this brand. You've given them some trust. And now you're checking all those small impressions and little points of engagement of going, does this check out, right? And it's on a very subconscious level because this brand, you interacting with it is a reflection of yourself. So if you're going along, and for your own safety, really, it's like you're going along going, okay, is this right? Because imagine Starbucks, we're in the bakery section, they have like little Post-it notes or something where it feels like, okay, that's something feels off about that. It doesn't feel like safe, but it's like a red flag, and you're just going, okay, all along the way, you keep, okay, does this match? Does this match? Is this consistent? Does this match?
Yeah.
Because again, as humans, it's like that. If something isn't consistent, then it's a red flag, and we go, okay, something's missing here, or something's just a little fishy.
And again, remember, brand, always come back to this. Brand is about relationships with the audience. So just like a human relationship, inconsistent behavior doesn't grow trust. And trust is key with a brand. The audience needs to be able to trust your brand. So if you are being inconsistent in even the smallest things, those are signals that even on a subconscious level, the audience's brains will process, and it will make them less leery because they're noticing those little things.
Right. Like the core of it is, like you said, with trust. And the opposite of that would be like in uncertainty. If they're getting those red flags, or if, you're acting weird around your friends, how you normally don't act, there's uncertainty in that. And they go, okay, what's going on? It makes them nervous now. It makes them unsure about their purchase. It makes them unsure about being in the Starbucks or whatever it is. And like what Rory Sutherland talks about is how even in wait times, it's not a matter of someone being impatient about a wait, but it's about the business leaving that customer in this limbo of uncertainty where they're like, okay, when's my next appointment? When am I going to be in line? And Disneyland does that where they, have the wait times. So there is a bit of certainty, and they're keeping that in check. And they've even done studies where they'll have people in a room and they'll have someone come out and go, okay, it's only 5 more minutes. And they'll walk away. And then 5 more minutes later, they'll come back and go, it's just 5 more minutes. And when they do that, when they keep leading on the test subject in this, they'll actually stay in that room for an abnormal amount of time because they keep getting that certainty check of, okay, just 5 more minutes. And they'll hold on, versus if they don't do that, the person will get up and leave and be like, I'm out of here. So it's like the uncertainty of not being consistent can actually hurt your brand massively, of maybe a lack of communication or a lack of actually telling them, wait times or your orders in process or anything like that. And like Scott said, then that really does erode like the trust that you need for your brand.
Yeah. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the third C. So we've talked about clarity and then consistency. And the third C is really creativity. And I know that for a lot of people, that word is vague, or it's hard, or it's ominous, right? If you're not creative as a person in general, or maybe feel that you're limited in creativity, you feel like I'm not going to be able to come out with a complete big out-of-the-box idea to help boost my brand. And that's not necessarily what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think what we're talking about is the notion of being creative in how your brand comes across, in so much as being different or unique from the crowd. And the biggest problem with a lot of brands for smaller businesses is that they are following the herd.
Right. And let's go back to like we talked about in episode 6 about having a narrative. Like these brands, the business models can be telling a similar story, whether it's about outdoor activities, about fast food, about a nice Italian entree. But the narrative, the distinct way you go about telling that story and your perspective on it, that's really that's the linchpin that really makes your customers go, okay, this one is for me. And that does go back to that first point of clarity, of having that clarity of going, okay, how does our brand go about telling this? Because then that can, whether it is a TikTok video or a reel on Instagram, then you can say in your version of that, your interpretation. You can take the medium and mold it to your style versus just following what other tactic everyone else is doing. And even with logos, you see this where in certain industries, sometimes logos will start to, kind of look like each other because everyone's following suit, or they're doing the same thing on their menu designs or signage and things like that, where they think they're doing it right because they're following the herd, when it's actually hurting their brand. And we've talked about that before and written about it, of how herd mentalities and school of fish are to actually confuse the prey, whether it's a shark or a lion, where they get so confused by all the animals herding together and they all look alike that then they end up not attacking any of them. And in business,
that's just the opposite of what you want in business.
You want to be attacked. You want the customer.
Yeah, you want to signal out. So, being the only orange thing in a whole sea of blue, that predator is going to identify you and zero in. But being creative in your brand is meaning just doing it in a way that just, in small ways, that you're being distinct. You're standing out, making sure you're standing out a little bit because you're choosing to be different.
And sometimes that can be very obvious. It doesn't have to be, like Scott said, it doesn't have to be this Hail Mary, out of the box, completely off the wall idea.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be something that's right under your nose or the industry's nose, where they are all going past it because it may be an assumption or something that's overlooked, and you can implement it very cost effectively and do something that is pretty darn obvious, and it hit a home run with it.
Yeah. But I think that and all these work together. It's like, if you were to put it into one phrase, it's more like, you need to be creatively consistent in your brand's clarity. It's not elevated and elegant in one area and then just slapped together in another.
On another note, I do like that these 3 C's, they really kind of envelop having a concept that is clear and creative, and then also the contextual, environment, the context of how your concept's being rolled out. It's taking that into consideration of going, okay, what is consistent within that? How do we be consistent? And like what Scott's saying, it's like, don't just, okay, we need to put our, logo here, or our brand needs to interact with this medium. Not just slapping it together and just, uploading it. Even profile pictures on Instagram and stuff. You see so many businesses where they'll just upload something that's obviously not created for that platform, and it just looks so off. And it's like, you're not taking into account your brand and its representation in this specific context and being consistent. And again, there could be a creative way of doing that and fulfilling that, but it's also having that consistency and really having that clarity of how you actually go about that.
We were just talking the other day about a brand that, feels like it was a great brand, but I feel like it's starting to lose some of its luster because of some of the lack of the things we've just been talking about, right, Reilly?
Yeah, and over the years, you've seen Starbucks really start to slide, where the brand of Starbucks was so strong for decades and decades, and it was unique. It really had consistency across all fronts, whether it was the vinyls on the window or the menu designs and just everything about it. And then they've seemed to have lost clarity as they've become so really focused on efficiencies and optimizing things and automatic receipts and just everything like that. And now they're being inundated with way too much mobile orders and drive-through. And now it's just become this big, very kind of clogged mess. And all of those kind of the 3 C's, like we talked about, they've been kind of pushed to the wayside. And now you have them, they're bringing a new CEO from Chipotle, but I think that's a recent example where you do see that, where they've kind of lost their creative spin on things. It's become kind of just lackluster. Yeah. And the consistency, mainly, that's been one thing that I've noticed, is that just the consistency.
Like, I noticed specifically with Starbucks that it started, I think, around with the COVID shutdown, because I noticed when they started opening things back up, it was like that shakedown and that pause shook up a lot of service industries where a lot of good managers had to find new career paths and things like that. But I noticed, like, it started when the stores were opening, even the last couple of years, where like some of the Starbucks in our towns were inconsistent in like even cleanliness. Like you come in, you could tell that they hadn't swept the night before. But again, the audience picks up on those things. Now, are they going to be able to recover? Yeah, most likely they will. But right now, it seems like they're trying so many different things, and you know, even in things such as training. A couple times I've gone in to have, you know, coffee beans, and they don't know how to use the grinder. And so to me, I'm like, that should be like part of day one training. Like, how is it you're doing all these other things, but you've never ground any coffee
Make
beans?
you a frappuccino though.
Exactly. Right. But you know, it's funny.
And even now they have the boba drinks and they have all these things. I'm like, it just doesn't feel like Starbucks. I'm expecting them to be like 7-Eleven next, where you go back there and you have like a Slurpee
Aren't
machine.
they're listed as like a fast food place? Like they're
technically
all the food options they have now. And I feel like maybe they've stretched themselves too thin in one, trying to expand and do things. But anyway,
You're gonna have the hot dogs on the rollers like inside.
like three or 4 day old. Dark brown looking hot dogs.
But I think a great brand that has done this, where they have the clarity, they know who they're selling to, extremely consistent with how they get it out and their sub brands and even their messaging. And I think there's a lot of creativity involved with it, is Target.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, everything I see with Target, where it's just like they have their iconic red, they have very simplistic, minimalistic style with their brand identity as a whole, but and then each sub brand, whether that's for the Halloween store or the Christmas one or even their little $5 section, it's like they've brought so much personality to these little avenues that it makes it a really engaging shopping experience that's also extremely consistent. And everything about it is very Target.
Target's personality is very dominant. Dominant meaning not a dominant personality, but it is has clarity. It knows who it is. Everyone knows what that personality is. It's fun. It's lively. It's playful. It's iconic with its red and its type treatment, and throughout the store, all the aisles, signage, everything is done to the same consistency, right?
Yeah.
So even just walking in, you feel like it sets you up for having a brighter experience because the personality is just that kind of cheery.
Yeah. And I do really feel like that they know who their shopper is. And it leans, you know, young moms, families, more female, and then all the brands really kind of orchestrate around that. And their use of private labels and like sub brands has been genius.
Yeah, Up and Up and Goodfellow and some of these others that
they've
they're
done
just,
a great job. And now you see a lot of other brands starting to follow that because it's been so successful. But the consistency and just their little creative twist on things. I love how they've done their app and just the way they, you know, with their brand messaging and everything, they've really created a unique, you know, personality.
Yeah. So clearly, you know, two different cases where those 3 C's are either being, you know, capitalized on or unattended in some form. But they go hand in hand. So I think, you know, we've chatted enough about the 3 C's for now. But definitely, if you haven't, check out our first episode. If you've been kind of a late listener to the Brandy podcast, go back and check out that first episode on clarity, because I feel like that's always going to be the benchmark by which Reilly and I kind of start on the conversation of brand. Is it clear what your brand is and what it represents and who it's trying to reach?
Yeah.
And then, but then follow through with being consistent. And do it in a unique and different way than how everyone else do it. Do it creatively. So thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to the next round. So cheers.